CatSynth TV.
Hey everybody, CatSynth TV! And today we are looking at the Matrix 12V from Arturia. It is a recreation of the legendary Oberheim Matrix 12 as a software instrument. We're going to demo all of its features along with some of the factory presets. But before we begin, please do subscribe to this channel for more synthesizer content coming out regularly. And please do consider supporting our demos via Patreon or Ko-Fi, links in the description below. Following on the success of the Obi series, Oberheim released the Xpander in 1984. It was a powerful polyphonic analog synthesizer with an extremely flexible voice architecture. It had 2 oscillators per voice, a VCF with 15 different modes, and a digitally controlled matrix system for mapping its myriad control sources to almost any other point in the signal path. The Matrix 12, introduced a year later, was bigger and fatter with a keyboard, 12-voice polyphony, and more programming options. Both the Matrix 12 and Xpander were prized by artists at the time and still command high prices today. The Matrix 12V recreates the architecture and sound of the original, along with an interface inspired by the Oberheim Matrix series, including the green LED displays. There are 2 oscillators, a frequency modulation section, the VCF, several different kinds of modulation including envelopes, trackers, LFOs, ramps, and more, and of course the modulation matrix at the heart of the instrument. We will go over each of these elements in more detail, starting with the oscillators. Each oscillator has 3 waveforms: sawtooth, triangle, and a pulse with width control. We can stack all 3 waveforms together. Each oscillator also has its own volume control. Independent volume controls for each element is a theme throughout the Matrix 12V. Let's bring in VCO2. We can use the detune and a different pulse width to get an even fatter sound. VCO2 has an additional noise source. There is also a hard sync function. It works best with a single sawtooth or pulse waveform on VCO2. Okay, let's turn off the sync in VCO2 and jump right into the modulation. Any parameter with one of these buttons can be a modulation destination. We'll click on VCO1 pulse width. It appears as the destination in the modulation page. We can assign up to 6 sources. Let's add LFO1. If we go to the LFO section, we can adjust the parameters, including speed and waveform. Let's leave it on triangle for now and dial in the speed to get a good pulse width modulation effect. As mentioned earlier, every element has its own VCA or volume control, including each LFO. Moreover, the VCAs themselves can be modulation destinations. Let's bring up the VCA for LFO1 in the modulation panel. We're going to attach one of these ramps as a source. A ramp is just a simple function that increases and stops at a maximum value, a bit like having just the attack stage of an envelope. By adding a ramp to the LFO, the pulse width modulation comes in gradually. Let's add the sawtooth back in and open up VCO1 frequency for modulation. We'll add LFO too. We can hear how the different waveforms affect the sound. The most interesting is the sample option, which uses period samples from any other modulation source. Let's use LFO3. If we set LFO3's waveform to random or noise, it's like a traditional sample and hold. But we can also use different waveforms and frequencies to get different patterns. Now let's switch the source to envelope 3. These are classic ADSR envelopes, which also have delay parameters. Once again, they each have their own VCA. This is a good opportunity to introduce the quantize option for modulation paths. If you toggle the little Q icon after the amount for the modulation source, the values will be quantized. We'll turn it on for this envelope source, and we hear how we get a staircase effect. Envelopes work really well for modulating sync, so let's remove envelope 3 from VCO1 and assign it to VCO2 with sync on. Let's now introduce the track modulators. These are functions that you can use to map and warp the values of other modulations. Let's take track 2 and use envelope 3 as its source, and assign track 2 to VCO2 frequency. We can tweak the values of different track points to make each segment of the envelope nonlinear. Let's now turn our attention to the filter section. As mentioned earlier, the VCF has 15 modes, including various low-pass, high-pass, bandpass, and some more exotic configurations for notch and phasing effects that were not found in most analog subtractive synthesizers of the time. Let's listen to each of them and how the frequency and resonance controls affect them. This three-phase filter is particularly unique, though it portends EMU's later Z-plane filters. Of course, the filters can be modulated too. If we click on the frequency parameter, we see that it is modulated by envelope 1, which provides a contour to the sound. We can use our LFO2 in sample mode as a second modulator. And add LFO5 with a slow triangle sweep for even more variety. That's pretty cool. The filter section also includes 2 VCAs. You can use these to set overall level or for amplitude modulation. In general, I find it best to use VCA2 for the overall amplitude envelope. And reserve VCA1 for amplitude modulation. We can set LFO4 to modulate VCA1. Okay, let's turn off the LFOs and look at the FM section. This is a linear FM, more like Yamaha's FM instruments than the exponential FM found in the Sequential Prophet 5 or Roland Jupiter 8. It can be set to modulate VCO1 or the VCF, but not both. Let's try it with VCO1. Okay, now with the VCF. Like other sections, the FM has its own amplitude control that can be modulated. Let's use ramp 2. Okay, let's turn off FM and turn back on some of our filter modulations. We now turn our attention to the advanced panels, which can be accessed via these buttons above the keyboard. We start with the effects panel. There are 2 effects slots and a variety of common effects available for each. Let's put a flanger in slot 1. And an analog delay in slot 2. The mod panel provides a single view of all the modulation routes at once. There are slots for up to 40 modulation routes, arranged on 2 subpanels. On the first panel, you can see the various modulation sources and destinations we have already programmed. We can also add additional routes here, with access to all the sources and destinations at once. For example, I can route from the mod wheel, called Lever 1 in the Matrix 12, to filter resonance. Oh, look, there's that pesky vibrato that's always the default for the mod wheel. Why is that always the default for the mod wheel? Let's jump over to the Page 2 panel to deal with that. Here we see some advanced parameters available for each of the elements in the voice. The frequencies of VCOs 1 and 2 and the VCF can be controlled from several sources, including keyboard, the lag modulator, we'll come back to that one, pitch bend, or vibrato. Let's turn vibrato off. As mentioned, the frequency of VCO1 and VCO2 can also be controlled by the lag modulator. It basically slows down incoming values from its assigned source. By default, it is assigned to the keyboard and can be used as a portamento effect. Let's turn off the keyboard and turn on the lag for the VCOs. By increasing the rate of the lag parameter, we get a slower portamento effect. Okay, enough of that. There are also some advanced parameters for the envelopes, LFOs, and ramps that control their triggering behavior. For example, we can have ramp 2 re-triggered by LFO 1. Let's turn the ramp modulation back up and set VCO2 back to sync. Finally, let's look at the Voices page. Here we find the vibrato control. Essentially, it's an extra global LFO with all of the waveforms except sample. This page also lets us control the behavior of the 12 voices. By default, we rotate through all of them as we play notes on the keyboard. We can set slight detunes to each of them, which adds some variety. We can also place them in different locations on the stereo field, which you should be able to hear on headphones or speakers with good stereo separation. We can also assign voices to different zones. Right now, they are all assigned to Zone 1. Instead of rotating between voices, we can stack them all on the same key using one of the unison modes. We can also set up multiple zones, either in different parts of the keyboard or stacked on top of one another. Let's assign voices 7 through 12 to Zone 2 and set both zones to rotate. We see the voices for both zones triggered for each key press. We can also set each zone to be unison. By transposing the voices in Zone 2, we can get some really fat intervals. As you can see, this is quite a flexible and powerful instrument. It can be a little daunting at first, but once you get the hang of it, you can get quite a variety of sounds. For the remainder of this video, we'll look at some of the factory presets. We hope you have enjoyed this detailed look at the Matrix 12V. To find out more, please visit Arturia.com and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching. Check out more at www.catsynth.com and please subscribe to CatSynth TV. Spanakopita!